This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining in. So this webinar is brought to you by Verity Software, and the topic for today's webinar is the four pillars of agile testing. I am Prasanna from Verity Software, and I would be the moderator for this session. So before we start with the webinar, I would just want to let you all know that you all are logged in as listen mode only for this 2-hour webinar, and you can communicate through the chat function only. So we will be taking the questions at the end of the session. So moving to today's presenter, so I would like to welcome Mr. Jayapradeep Jyotis. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Verity Software and a professional IT technocrat with more than 20 years of experience in product management, IT governance, pre-sales, and software quality assurance for software services and product development. JP also has extensive experience in managing teams and delivering projects on time and within budget, and has full lifecycle experience in software development, including requirement analysis, business analysis, test process definition, environment management, delivery automation. JP also has extensive experience in building and managing offshore centers and test factories for customers. He's also the co-author of the book Software Testing Guidebook. uh, JP is experienced in transitioning projects in agile development environments and architected solutions and managed projects on complex technologies using Python, Ruby, MongoDB, Hadoop, Vertica, LAMP, etc. He has also handled end-to-end delivery and innovation for two successful market products with a constant passion. I would just like to, one second. Sorry about that. He has also handled end-to-end delivery and innovation for two successful market products. With constant passion for learning, JP has acquired these certifications, some of them being ISTQB Foundation Level, ISTQB Test Manager, ISTQB Test Analyst, Agile Extension, Prince2 Practitioner, Certified Agile Tester, and Accredited Trainer in ISQI DSA Design Sprint Master 2.0. So that was a brief introduction about JP. Now moving to today's topic. These would be the following points which would be covered in today's topic. So although people talk about agile testing, they still do approach it as a normal sequential projects. This has led to pain in many testing teams because of vast difference between expectation and actual deliveries. But there are some simple mechanisms teams can adopt to overcome these hurdles. So this webinar will give you an introduction to some of these techniques that could be easily implemented by agile testers to get the right output. All these techniques and more, including hands-on exercises, are covered in our course Agile United Certified Professional Agile Tester. For more details, I'll leave a link in the chat section. You can check out the link at the end of the session. So over to you, JP sir. Thank you.
Give me a minute. Good afternoon, all of you. Now, the reason we chose this topic for this webinar was, see, everybody knows there's something called agile testing. But what exactly is agile testing? Is it a different beast? Is it a different type of test to be carried out? These are all constant lingering doubts that there are, it's always there in people's minds. And even people who are, engaged in agile projects, they sometimes wonder, are we doing this right? Because there's no difference between what we were doing earlier to what we're doing currently. Okay, so the entire agenda for the webinar today would be to understand what agile is and what agile testing is. We'll also look at some of the pitfalls of how do we go wrong while we approach agile testing. Then we look at the four pillars of agile testing. Okay, and this is something we deeply thought about and thinking what are the things that we are missing out. while we are doing agile testing. And from that, we have evolved something called the 4 pillars of agile testing. And then we look at some simple steps. There are about 13 to 14 steps to get this right, but we'll talk about some 4 to 5 critical steps on how you can implement that in your daily projects to get agile testing right. Now, anything about agile cannot start without this particular 4 statements. The Agile Manifesto. Now, why is the Agile Manifesto so important? I'll quickly ask, am I audible? Can you guys just put it in the chat box if I'm audible? Or Prasanna, can you answer if I'm audible?
Yes, sir, you are. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So nothing can start without the Agile Manifesto. Why? I'm not a stickler for norms and semantics and definitions, but if you want to understand Agile, if you want to get your Agile right, we have to understand the thinking behind Agile. And the thinking behind Agile has not been represented in any other form better than the Manifesto of Agile, where people got together and said, this is what we want to define as Agile development. So what did they say? They basically said, we are uncovering better ways of developing software, and by doing it and helping others do it, we have come to value. We have come to value what? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. Now, believe me, these are the most misinterpreted 4 lines in the history of agile developments. What people see is, they see the left part, your left. If you looking at the screen, what is represented on your left, okay? Which is, they say, oh, individuals and interactions are important, working software is important, customer collaboration is important, great. Now, what they miss out is the last line of the manifesto, which says, that is, while there is value on the items on the right, okay, which is value on the items on the, things like process and tools, comprehensive documentation and all, we value the items on the left more. So they never said, ignore things that's mentioned on the right. They never mentioned, don't have a plan. They never mentioned, don't have documentation. They never mentioned, don't have process and tools. What they mean here, the meant was, whenever there is a conflict or there is a choice that you have to make between one of these things on the left and the right, the items on the left are valued more. Let me give you an example. You have a defect reporting process. You have a bug reporting tool as well. Great. Now, there's a bug that you reported. You are in, say, a 14-day sprint cycle. Now, my fundamental assumption here is going to be that all of you are aware of Agile, or you have some kind of a touch point with Agile. You're either doing it in your projects, or you've been involved in something that is remotely Agile, or you are aware of what Agile life cycles are. Okay. Now imagine you have a 2-week window, a 2-week sprint or a Scrum cycle running, and you are on day 8 of that. You have reported a bug using your bug tracking process and your bug tracking tool. Mid of day, the developer has sent it back to you, send the bug back to you saying, not reproducible. Okay, makes sense. Just come over the tool. They have put in their comments. Now your process says you have to add additional information, probably retry the bug to see if it is reproducible. You retry everything, add additional information, send it back to the developer. Developer checks it again on the next day and sends it saying, no, not reproducible. I'm still not able to get it. Now, so far you have been following your process. But what's happening here? you have just one more day to go before delivery. It's
JP
important to
sir,
get this.
sorry to cut you there. So the slide, you're on the still on the first slide, it seems. Now I think it has moved.
Okay, let me see. I'm just going to move these slides. Okay, just see. Are they moving?
No. Now
How about
currently
now?
you're on Agile Manifesto. It's on the same slide. It's not moving.
From the same slide? Oh. Okay. So I'm going to do
It's
something.
yeah, and I don't think it's on the presentation mode, sir. Can you check that as well? It's not on the presentation mode.
Now I've removed it from presentation mode. I understand.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Now let me just share it again. Just give me a minute.
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to play it and just tell me what you see now.
Currently, we see the slide little loss, batch size, and queue length.
But is that on presentation mode?
No.
I understand. I'm going to make a further change.
Sure. Yes. So now it's on how to split a user story. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
Now how about it? Are you seeing it on the full screen?
Yes, it's visible now on the full screen. Yeah. Little laws and now it's moving. What to do? Sequential models. What do? Okay. Now it's fine. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
So we're still on the manifesto. We have still not moved ahead.
Okay.
So I was saying that okay, now you're 1 day away from your delivery. Okay. Your bug tracking process, you have updated it, you have sent these things back and forth, all great. The process has been followed. Now what do we need to do? This is where the manifesto says, see, if individuals and interactions can handle it, go for it. So what do I need to do? Probably call up the developer, share my screen and say, this is where the bug is. Or prompt the laptop right in front of it and say, if it's not reproducible, I will show you how to reproduce it. So we're not ignoring the bug tracking process. We're not ignoring the bug tracking tool, but we value the individual interactions more. Similarly, we're not talking about ignoring documentation. Absolutely no. We are saying that documentation is not the primary deliverable to the customer. So if there is a conflict between where should I spend my time? Is it on documentation or is it on getting working software up? Spend more time on working software. Okay. So this misconception should be removed. That's why we talked about it. Now, why did Agile come in? Okay. Agile came in not because of, there's something on chat, let me see. Okay. Agile didn't come into play because somebody wanted to try a new method. Absolutely no. Agile came into play because there were some inherent drawbacks. I would not say flaws in the sequential models that we have followed, like our waterfall or V's and all. There were no flaws in that model. Okay. But there were some inherent drawbacks. Okay. Now let's look at what do sequential models like waterfall and all assume. It assumes that you do know what you don't know. Basically, you know everything about the project. You know exactly what the customer wants. You know all the requirements. See, only then the sequential model can proceed, right? It says phase wise, proceeding phase wise. So you need to know all the requirements upfront. You need to be able to do all the estimations upfront. And it also assumes, even if you don't know, okay, the impact of that will be minimal. We'll be able to handle it. We know in real life situations, that's not how it happens. It's only after the system is built, when you do some testing, more information is known. When we go to the customer with that, further information is known. And finally, when it goes to production level, a whole lot of information which is hiding so far is known. So this assumption of we know everything about the system fundamentally fails. It's there in the word. When you say assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. And in some kind of deliveries, it used to do that. In reality, what happens is there are many things which are unknown. Basically, you don't know what you don't know. We know certain things now, but as we proceed, further information may be available to us. Okay. So in sequential models, they force you to take design decisions, architecture decisions, requirement decisions very early in the cycle. And it always assumes there is a clear solution for every problem available, and we will get it done. We'll get it right the first time. Another chat that came along. Okay. So we will get this right the first time. We know the solution. We know the perfect solution. And we're going to get it right the first time, which is probably not going to really work. Okay. So a better approach is to, instead of doing everything together, instead of doing entire deliveries of all the requirements together, it's better to split it piecemeal, make it into smaller chunks. Okay. Why? Why do we say that? It's mathematically and statistically supported, and that's why I'm bringing in this concept called Little's Law. It's a very unheard of concept generally within agile cycles. You know what? Little's Law really works, and that Little's Law is the reason why we try to do smaller chunk delivery. Okay. Now, what does Little's Law say? It basically says the long-term average number, or just take it as the length of queue of things to be done. Okay, it basically comes from the queuing theory. So there's a queue of things to be done, 1 to 10, 1 to 50, whatever. The length of that queue depends on what is the average arrival rate. Okay, how many work packets or how many people or how many things arrive at the same time multiplied by the time required to process it. That determines the queue length. So basically, if my average arrival rate, okay, I get 5 tasks a day. Okay, I get 5 tasks a day. And my average throughput or my processing speed is about half a task a day. Okay, which means in a day, I can process 2.5 tasks. Okay, do you understand that? I get 5 tasks a day. My throughput is to process about half a task a day, which means 5 multiply, I can process within a day. Sorry, my throughput is not half a task a day. My average time to process a task is about half a day for a task. I will roughly take about 4 hours to process task, which means in a day, I can do about 2.5 tasks. Okay. That's how much I'll be able to do. Or probably, sorry, I will be able to do only 2 tasks a day because I can do only, or again, I'm again wrong there. If I'm able to do only half a task a day, roughly at the end of it, 5 tasks have come. I've processed only half a task, which means what is the remaining queue length? It's about 4.5 tasks on the queue. Okay. Now another 5 more tasks come tomorrow, which means the queue size is just going to increase another day, another half a task. So that's how it's going to proceed. Okay. Think about it. There's a store that is operating. Okay. The average arrival rate at the store is about, in a day, about 10 people will arrive. Okay. And they take about about 1 hour or half an hour to do their actions and come out of it. Okay. So, and you have one cashier counter to deal with it. Okay. In that case, my arrival rate, okay, my queue length there would be, what is my arrival rate? It's about every hour, say if the store is operating for 10 hours and 10 people are coming in, every hour, one person is coming in multiplied by 1 hour for that person to do all the actions and all to get out. So my queue length will be only 1 at any point of time. Now imagine my arrival rate doubles. I get 20 customers in 10 hours, which means and they spend about 1 hour to do their shopping. In that case, my queue length will increase to 2 at any point of time at the cashier checkout counter. Now, if the arrival rate increases further to 30, my queue length is going to increase to 3. Okay. So, how can I reduce the queue length? Either I add one more cashier counter or 3 cashier counters at any point of time so that I can handle all customers and there is no queue that builds up. Because if the number of people arriving is much more than number of people leaving, okay, the queue will just keep on building. Okay, so either we have to increase the processing time or build in more people to do the processing. That's the only way to handle the queue length. This is exactly what we do in Agile. What we do is we reduce the chunk of work coming in so that arrival rate. If I had 500 requirements, putting all of them together, okay, it's a huge queue to be processed. Instead, what do? I take chunks of requirements, increase the processing speed so that the delivery cycles are faster, so that your queue, the number of pending requirements within a certain sprint is kept within control. Now, we can always do it in our older way, sequential way, which will lead to a long queue. Now, what happens when there are longer queues? There's longer cycle time. There's a much higher risk because the biggest risks get uncovered only at the end of the cycle, right? Because it's just been waiting in the queue. Nobody has been processing it. Okay, lower quality, lower predictability, all of this will happen. Okay, so mathematically, Agile is really supported, and one reason that Agile models evolved was because of this concept of Little's law. Another reason why Agile became popular was because, now this is from a lot of studies and surveys conducted. We built a lot of things which are hardly used by the customer. Okay, so based on multiple studies, it's been found out on an average among all the features that we built, 45% is never used. The remaining 55% is used, but not always. Okay, so that is where we come with this concept called MOSCO. Must have, should have, could have, won't have. Okay, you need to split your requirements down into must-have requirements, which is absolutely critical for your system, which should be processed first. Then should have. For the critical requirements, what are the supporting requirements? Those are your should have requirements, which should be processed next. Then could have. Then these could have requirements are not critical, neither supporting. If they are there, okay, customer might be happy, might not be happy, but for the success of the project, these requirements are not of paramount importance. And there are a lot of won't have requirements, which are requirements also captured. They don't make sense to implement. So Agile tries to go from the must-have requirements all the way to your won't-have requirements. And at some point of time, project management and all understanding that some of these requirements are not even important for us for delivery. Okay. So there's a lot of interest in Agile. It's not a recent phenomenon. It's been there for quite some time. What is driving that? It is reducing the time to market, and we can find no better example than, look at the phase that we went through for lockdown. Okay. Once this was apparent that lockdown was coming in and there is a larger pandemic, look at the kind of innovations that have happened from the IT sector, from the IT side. We started seeing, contact tracing applications being built. We started seeing geo-mapping applications being built. We started seeing isolation, quarantine help applications being built. We started seeing applications like Arogya Setu and all built within 2 to 3 weeks, which is the primary database to track people, for doing contact tracing, to exchange encrypted keys across, and understand, it's not a very simple application to be built. Now, imagine a sequential scenario. I'm not saying it's impossible to do it in a sequential scenario, but it's agile methodologies which convince people saying that, okay, building good applications, building quality applications in shorter time periods is possible. Now, people used to do it with sequential models, but it is a very rare occurrence in that. So you can respond back better to your business and customer requirements. Application quality is at the center of Agile. So although we're doing things faster, although we're doing quicker deliveries, if it's compromising on application quality, then it's not Agile. Okay. It also recognizes, which is very well known with the industry, that we don't know everything about the system. More information will become available. That's not, but not now. So Agile models appreciate and recognize that fact, and people have seen visible improvements in the delivery. But what is not Agile? Okay, and this comes from people try to do a lot of things and then call it Agile. What is not Agile? It's not compressing your project schedule. It is not removing every process around and saying, oh, Agile doesn't like process. Let's throw out the process and let's do it without process. It's not about junking documentation. It's not about writing code. People try to act fast-paced. So I'm writing code till the last moment. No, Agile discourages that. Nobody is asking you to write code till the last moment. Basically, it's not an excuse for doing anything. People do anything and everything and say, oh, we are doing this because we are Agile. No, sorry. Agile has principles to be followed, has its own principles. And if you're going to beat those principles, it's not Agile. Fundamentally, what I'm saying is, if you're doing waterfall every 2 weeks, it's not Agile. And that's what many organizations do. They follow the same waterfall process, but you know what? We'll do it for a smaller set of requirements and we'll do it every 2 weeks. The testing is the same. The development methodology is the same. The requirement capture mechanism is the same. The design mechanism is the same, but done in smaller chunks, and let's call it Agile. No, it's not Agile. Now, this is again something that's known to everybody, but let me try to quickly run through it. So this is what we call the fundamental heartbeat of Agile. Every Agile project has to go through it. Be that Scrum, be that extreme programming, be that Kanban, whatever is the methodology that you use, every Agile methodology project has to go through this heartbeat in one or the other way. So you have basically, it says you have a set of stories or requirements. We pull things from this backlog, whatever you call it as. Then within the cycle, the sprint, whatever you call it, we try to elaborate the story, which means we define the story there. So whatever is written as a requirement is not sacrosanct. It can be changed. It is elaborated. It is defined. Then we develop it. We code, build it. Then we test it. If the test passes, the story is pushed towards a product increment. If it fails, it repeats the same cycle. So define, develop, test has to be done within the same cycle. And it has to be, and you have to have teams which has the capability of doing everything. So if teams or Agile teams go and say, oh, we don't really need testers, we need generalists, then you're going against Agile. Why? Because Agile clearly says you should have skills and capabilities to define, develop, and test within each cycle. Okay, the reason why I just put this slide in is because there is a lot of confusion around what is incremental, what is iterative. Now, all of us might understand the term incremental very well. So with every sprint, every cycle, I increment, I add a few features. So sprint one, X set of features, a new one product increment comes out, X set of features. Sprint two, another product increment comes out with X set of features. Great. So incremental is understood. Let's try to understand this word iterative, and it's very, very important to understand this word iterative. Why? It has a testing implication when you talk about iterative. What do you mean? See, one meaning of the word iterative is repeated cycles. Okay, doing it in cycles, that is true. But there's another meaning for the word iterative as well, which means going back and refining things or reworking on things already delivered. Imagine this. You are in sprint 1. There is a particular story that you're working on. Okay. And the story has multiple parts. It has a web interface, it is a mobile interface, it is a smartwatch interface. Now, the developers and the team, they figure out in their planning, see, we can't do all of this of the story in this particular sprint or this iteration. It doesn't make sense. So the first sprint, let me do the fundamental core functionality and the web interface. And in subsequent iterations, in subsequent sprints, I will go back and refine this story that has been already delivered. I might add a mobile interface, I might add a smartwatch interface. Let me go back and refine what has been already delivered. So that is what you really mean by iteration. Going and reworking on features, stories, any work product already delivered. Now this has two implications. One, from a testing perspective, you have to understand. See, sometimes we get too carried away by doing our test. Oh, I got the story in the first iteration, and I raised left, right, center bugs on. Oh, web interface alone is not enough. There has to be an integration to the mobile interface. You have to be prepared for the mobile interface. Mobile interface has to look like this. We have to understand this will be iterated upon. Some of the features that you're looking at for the current stories might be done in upcoming sprints. So we need to know where to draw the boundary in terms of testing. Second thing is, this is going to impact your regression big time. Imagine this. You delivered a story in sprint 1. Later on in sprint 5, this story was reworked upon. Now in sprint 1, you created a set of regression tests, but you have absolutely no traceability, any of that built. These regression tests are automated, put into your regression book. In sprint 5, I am iterating on the story already delivered in sprint 1, which means there are some fundamental changes to the story. At this point of time, you as a tester should be able to go back and trace. Due to this valid change happening on a pre-delivered story, should I be updating are there any regression tests which have got impacted? Should I be going and updating my regression test? Should I delete off some of the existing regression tests because it doesn't make sense anymore? Or should I just modify them? Or should I add new stories? Or add new regression tests to cover the else what happens is you might run non-updated regression tests and they might fail. The failure might not be because of a bug, but because the story has been reworked upon and there is a valid functional change. So this will lead to what we call as false positives. So you need to understand that. Now on this slide, I was not very comfortable putting the slide in, but then I said, okay, these are my feelings. I have consulted and worked with 80 plus agile teams over the past 10 to 15 years. And these are my feelings. How do majority of the people, it might not be applicable in your scenario, so I'm not saying it's applicable to you, but this is what I've seen in the industry. How do people do agile testing? Their fundamental assumption even now is, I know everything about this user story. This user story is sacrosanct. And because this has all the information. So I know everything about these requirements and user stories for the current sprint. Many people wait till the end of the sprint to carry out their test. For most of the testers, They don't test beyond the acceptance criteria given in the user story. Acceptance criteria becomes the primary reference. I'm not saying you should not test acceptance criteria. Definitely you should test it. But making that the only primary reference, then you're going wrong. Large focus on GUI regression test, automated GUI regression test, graphical user interface test. You actually, there's something called the agile testing pyramid, which says the largest number of tests should be your automated unit test, should be your automated API test. Instead, what do? We go and invert that pyramid. The largest number of tests for us, or automated tests for us, will be your GUI test, and the smallest number of tests should be your automated test. We still function as silos. Developers doing what they know best. Testers doing their thing without communicating with each other. Somebody sitting in an on-site or an offshore location is doing their own work, passing it on to others. There is no collaboration that happens. Maximum focus in terms of agile testing is even now happening on what we call functional checks. I'm not using the term test here. I'm saying functional check, and there is a reason for it. We'll come to that reason. So fundamentally, nothing has changed except for we test every week. At the beginning of the so-called agile cycle, I used to have a team. I was interacting with a team, and one of the team leads there said, JP, I asked him, what changed ever since agile came? And the person made a very interesting statement. They said, JP, earlier on, doing projects was like running a marathon. Initially, we start off slow in the beginning of a project, and towards the end, it becomes like a 100-meter dash, very fast pace. He said the only difference that has come ever since agile is there is we are running 100-meter dashes every day. Instead of running marathon, we are running 100-meter dashes every day. We are getting tired. Nothing else has changed. And probably it's true for a lot of teams even now. So what can change, and what am I basing my 4 principles of testing on? Okay. So for that, we need to go and look at something called the Rumsfeld paradigm. Okay. And Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of State, something like the foreign minister, okay, in the George Bush administration. So if you do remember, US attacked Iraq, saying they have weapons of mass destruction. But then towards the end of the war, there was no weapons of mass destruction found. And in one of the press briefings, Rumsfeld was asked, there were no weapons of mass destruction, and how come you made this decision of going and attacking Iraq? So this is a statement taken from his press briefing. It says, reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things that we know. There are things that I know about it. Great. We also know there are known unknowns, which means there are some things that we know about that I don't know. Let me tell you the known knowns and known unknowns. I know my name is so and so. I'm very confident about it. I know my years of experience is so and so. I know the kind of technology platforms that I have worked in. So these are known knowns about me. Then there are known unknowns about me. I know that I don't know about certain things. For example, I know, you asked me something about quantum computing. I have no idea how quantum computing works. So I'm aware of the fact that I don't know it. Then he also said, but there are also unknown unknowns. There are a lot of things that we don't know, and we are not aware of the fact that we don't know about them. We are just not aware of the fact that there are things that we don't know about. If one says, and if one looks at the history of a country and other free countries, it is a latter category that tends to be difficult ones, which is the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns become the most difficult to handle. Now, Rumsfeld didn't pick this up, you know, he didn't create this paradigm of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. This has been a recognized project management and strategy paradigm. See, I put a screenshot from a NASA project management manual, and it says perhaps another of the most important factors contributing to cost overruns is the lack of recognition of unknown unknowns. So they clearly say there are, as part of project management, there are unknown unknowns, things that we don't know. Now, why is that important for us, and why are we talking about it? Okay. So here is where we're going to build the 4 pillars of agile testing. There are things that we know them. Once you know that you know them, they are stuck. I read a requirement. I read a user story. There are some things which I'm very confident that I know them because the requirement there is very clear. They become facts. From the same point, there are some things that we know that we don't know them. When I read a requirement, I'm confused about certain parts. I'm not very sure about certain approaches. So they become questions for me. They become Just give me 1 minute. There's some disturbance around, so give me a minute. So when we read a requirement, okay, there are some clarifications that you require. There are some questions that you have. So they are the ones that you know, but that you don't know the depth of it. So they become questions. Then there are items that you don't know that you know them. Okay. So when you kind of, you're ignorant of the fact that you actually know certain ideas or know certain information. So sometimes when you carry out your test in certain areas, when you're exploring the product, you get this eureka moment saying that, oh, I already knew how this functions. I have further information on how this functions. Okay. Now this comes up, some additional information comes up. So this is there somewhere within you, but you're not aware of that. That becomes your intuition part, which you should use for your testing. And then comes the most important and the most dangerous part. Things that you are not aware that you don't know about them. You think every information given to you is either known or known unknown. There are a lot of things within your system, within your project, within your requirements that you are not even aware that exist, and you just ignore them. So that is where the 4th pillar of exploration should come in. Let's see that in detail of why these 4 pillars are important. So when you look at risk mapping, on one end we know nothing. On another end we know everything. But our understanding lies somewhere in between. What we know and what we should know. We can't know everything. So the difference between what we know currently and what we should really be knowing is the risk gap. And this risk gap is what leads to your rejections, your production issues, etc. Okay. So these risks have to be tackled. Now testers have to find the potential dangers and threats to the software's operation. Okay. So this is where, remember I used the term check before. And I didn't use the term functional test, I said functional check. Okay. Let me explain it. I have some information. How does the information come to me? The information comes to me as either requirements or as a design or as other product features. So my stories are there, that's information for me. My design is available for me, wireframes are available for me, that's information for me. I'm happy with it. Now using that, let me come to the known domain. Say I have an application, mobile application, using which I can transfer funds to contacts that exist within my mobile. Okay. So the requirement says I can search for contacts from my mobile, select them, choose the amount of money to be transferred. The system will go back and check if you have enough balance. Okay. And if the mobile number is still existing, based on that, you can give a transfer and enter a PIN or a two-factor authentication, and the transfer will happen. Great. There is a certain set of information. Now, using this certain set of information, what do? I see if the product is complying to it. I'm not finding out anything new. I'm just saying, is it complying to the requirement? And that is why I call it checking. I'm checking if the information known is actually implemented correctly within the project. Now, when you are doing checking, using checking, we can confirm if the information or the requirement given to us is correct. While we do checking, we might also find out some additional interesting scenarios which are not covered in the information that you want. So checking activities come under the known knowns. Your questions and your facts are here. Now there are known unknowns there. We have to go beyond the information given. For example, okay, I can transfer funds to this person. What happens if the person rejects my transfer? That is not being captured in my user story, but that needs to be tested. A person, once I did a transfer, that person was in my contact list. Then after that, I fought with that person, so I deleted that person's number from my contact list. In that case, next time I want to do a transfer, will that person's name be there in the history so that I can transfer? Or once I delete it off, would it be removed off? Now, this is not being captured in the information. So what do I need to do? I have to use the information and do testing activities. Now I'm going into areas which are not clearly known to me. I have to do some exploratory testing or some other form of testing to uncover further information. Now, whatever I uncover, say I figure out that once a person rejects my transfer, even if I have it in my contact list, I will not be further able to do any further transfer. I have to add it to the information. So this is a cycle that we should be looking at. That's why we use the term check. Things that we know, your acceptance criteria, you use the stories, basic information there, they require check. Why? I'm just confirming the system is working according to what I have as information. And what we don't know requires a test. Understand? It's definition. Okay. Again, not a fan of definition, but we need to have some kind of a differentiation. Else we'll end up calling even confirming our knowledge as a test. Now, in an agile context, a person has to move away from being a functional tester to an agile tester. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? From moving away from a functional tester to an agile tester. Basically, we have to move away from just checking if the information we have is validated by the system to actually going and testing and looking at hidden information. So you have to help your customer manage risk. You have to detect and mitigate risk. You have to gain further insight into operations. All of this due to the crunch time available and due to the short cycle time available, every information might not be put across in your user stories and available with your product owner. Product owner itself might be representing somebody else. might not have all the information regarding your requirements. Further, you have to work to help the team to make an even better product. Just preventing defects or detecting defects is not enough. We want to make better products to meet customers' expectation and the intent. And we have to help the team increase the quality awareness. So here is our definition of agile testing. Not a fan of definitions, but we need to look at it. Why do we test it? Okay, that is the first part to be tackled. Read carefully. It says to help the client in the process of reviewing his product by providing as much insight as possible. There might be some insights that even the client is lacking. And we want to uncover that information and provide insights. We want to be constantly delivering a better product. So they help the team produce a better product. What do we do to achieve those goals? So what are the things to be done? We have to develop awareness of quality. In Agile, something is very, very important. And if we don't do this, Agile teams will collapse or they will be underperforming. What is that? Quality is everybody's responsibility. It's not only the tester's responsibility. I'm not saying everybody should be testing. No. Everybody should be contributing towards quality of the product. If it's only left onto the tester, then God save the Agile team. What else do we perform? We perform tests of the criteria that have not been clearly established or fully determined. We have to perform tests. Just a minute. Let me just highlight it. We have to perform tests of the criteria that are not clearly established or fully determined. These are the limbs of your unknown unknowns and known unknowns. And how do we do it? We have to experiment and research using methods like exploratory testing, pair testing, bug hunting, etc. But that alone is not enough. You have to perform the normal tests to check on the established criteria like your unit test, integration, compliance, security, etc. And who can perform it? People who have the right skills. The skills include agile skills, people skills, technology skills. People should have incredible motivation within agile cycles, right? Constant changes will try to drag you down. It's very easy to get demotivated. Sometimes you're waiting for clarification till you reach out and get the clarification. Nothing is forthcoming. So all of this will, hit your motivation skills, your motivation abilities. But then we need people who are self-motivated, who can be driving this. So this is something like the Agile Manifesto. This is something interesting that I found. So one of the popular authors within Agile testing is Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin. Okay, they have written this book called Agile Testing and More Agile Testing. It's a recommended reading for all of you. Extremely good book. So they said, like the Agile Manifesto, we should also have an Agile Testing Manifesto. Where they say we value testing throughout over testing at the end. At every stage, there should be some form of testing happening. It can be a review, it can be some unit test, it can be story elaboration, but don't keep it for the end of the sprint. Next, we want to be preventing bugs over finding bugs. This is a very dicey area to get into. Why do I say that? Why? Because in our organizations, even now, a tester is graded by the number of bugs that you can find. Average number of bugs that you get. Now, if you are preventing bugs, what will happen? The total number of bugs coming into the cycle will reduce, which also means the number of bugs that you detect or report will also reduce. So it's a very dicey situation here. Text understanding over checking functionality. So confirming the requirement is not what we are looking at. Rather, going beyond the user stories, going beyond the acceptance criteria, and understanding about the test rather than just checking functionality. Building the system over breaking the system. See, we are all working together to deliver a better product. That doesn't mean you shirk your testing responsibility and say, you know what, I'm building the system, so no more finding good bugs because I'll not be able to break the system. No. What they mean is, see, your primary focus is to find bugs, no doubt. But contribute in a more positive way, working with every team member on resolving that as well, on finding bugs early as well, rather than just saying, okay, I found bugs, fixing all of this is now your responsibility, goodbye. And team responsibility for quality over sector responsibility for quality. See, we can be working together with people. I'll give you an example. Imagine I'm in a sprint cycle. And at that time, I want to decide what are the exact tests I should be focusing more on. So at that time, say I reach out to my developers and say, buddy, can you do one thing? Can you let me know about all the unit tests that you have performed and the results of those unit tests? So that I know what are the basic tests they have already carried out, what are the results of that. So I can focus probably on bigger scenarios, more complicated scenarios, which have not been covered here, rather than reinvent the cycle and waste my time doing the same test again and again. Now, for all of this, I said there are about 12 to 13 steps that you can do to get your agile testing right. But we'll just cover some critical 3-4 steps quickly. Okay. The most important thing to be done is understand your project context correctly. What happens within agile is sometimes we are too focused only on that particular sprint. Stories to be delivered in that sprint that we lose sight as testers of what is the overall product. Where does the story fit into the overall context? See, no story exists in isolation. No requirement is going to exist in isolation. It's going to be part of a flow. It's going to be part of an integration. So initially, you should start with understanding your product context. And for that purpose, we have created a very easy mnemonic for you called product, platform, relations, operate, data, users, construction, time. Let me quickly run you through that. Okay. We can discuss all of this in detail later on. First, you need to understand your platform. Okay, and make a note of it. I'll show you a mind mapping method, or I'll show you an example mind map. Why is it important? So what hardware, what middleware, what software are you dealing with? Then the relationships. What are your user interfaces for the product? What are the system interfaces? Any API interfaces? Import, export, that too is an interface. Then the operations of the product. What are the primary functionalities that define the product? What are the mathematical calculations involved? What kind of security restrictions, user rights, data encryption, data security, vulnerabilities, etc. that you see? Are there any transformations that are happening within the product? For example, when I'm transferring money, does it get changed from one currency format to another currency? When I, set up a font and change it to another language, is there a transformation that's happening? Then data. How does a product handle data? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? Which of this data is persistent? How long would it stay within the system? After what period of time will it expire from the system? What is invalid data? Sometimes somewhere in between invalid and valid will lie noise data. They're neither valid nor invalid, but just nuisance value for you. Then what's the life cycle of data? create, read, update, delete, that cycle of every data. Okay. Who are the users? What is the environment? Okay. Imagine you're doing a mobile app. Now lighting becomes very important. Okay. The colors that you choose become very, very important there. Why? Because it can be used if it's fixed within a factory. The tablet, everything is fixed within a factory. It's okay. But what if it's used on the field? A salesman is using it on, sunlight conditions. Are your buttons visible? Are your color combinations right? Okay. What is the general usage pattern? What is the disfavored usage? What are the mistakes people can use? What kind of mistakes can people do out of ignorance? What if maliciously somebody is trying to create damage for your system? What if it's stupid use, extreme usage conditions? Then we need to understand the construction of the system. Okay. So what are my executables, individual routines, hardware involved, non-executable files like multimedia, programs, sample data, other collaterals like web links, packaging, licenses, etc. Then time-related parameters. What are my input-output delays? What is fast? What is slow? What are the change rates? Okay, does it give out data in spikes? Does it give it in bursts? Are there interruptions possible? What is the current concurrency? How many multi-users can be doing it, handling at the same time? How many parallel threads can be running? What is the timeout settings, time zones, etc. Okay, so that covers your product mnemonic. I put up a example mind map, okay, of a dummy product. So basically, this is a portable fan which also can play multimedia. Okay, so it can be put up at events and office locations and all. So it will have a screen where it will play some advertisements or whatever it is. It also has a fan, okay, basically for cooling. So I've done the entire product thing. So from a platform perspective, sorry. So from a platform perspective, I have, what are my hardware software? It runs on Windows. It has micro SD. It has a 3D fan, a card reader. From relationships perspective, I have a UI software. I can import movies, import pictures, write to an SD card. From an operations perspective, import movies has functionality, import picture is a functionality, editing is a functionality, error handling is a functionality, language selection is a functionality, download to SD card is a functionality. From a data perspective, what are the supported movie formats, what are the supported picture formats, what are the size boundaries, what are the typical users, what is the construction of the system, what hardware, software, documentation is required, okay? What is the timing factor? So all of this I put it across in a mind map. Now, where should you be using it? Initially, when you start your project, I am not saying create a mind map, not required, but at least have these points noted down from the product perspective. Platform, relations, operate, data, users, construction, and time. Have this noted down. And each sprint planning interval, keep time to see which of this is applicable. Is more information available on that and updated? So you have a better perspective. You have a better context of your project. Okay. Now, once that's done, the second thing I would suggest you do is to do something called horror plots. Now, what do I mean by horror plots? See, generally, we're looking at, I need to confirm the acceptance criteria. So I need both positive and negative tester. Great. But horror plots go beyond it. This is used to cover your unknown unknowns. Fundamentally, what can really go wrong? So it's introduced as a medium to overcome the pitfall of just to find your normal acceptance criteria. Here, you approach every user story that you are testing from the perspective of what can go wrong. This is the definition, if I say, of a horror plot is, what is the outcome of a user story that you don't want a customer to find out or see? So let me give an example. See, what if I can see the account details of somebody else when I log into my banking password. That's a typical horror plot for a login of a personal banking environment. Not saying it happens, but these are examples. So how do we do it? Generally, one simple way of doing it is what we call the nightmare headline game. What can your system do so that one fine day you get that really nasty email from the customer, or a nightmarish headline that will come, or a nightmarish production issue that will come that you are dreading? Okay. For example, let's go back to the situation that we discussed, a story that we discussed. As a user, I want to be able to transfer funds to contacts within my mobile phone using my transfer application. What would be a potential nightmarish email that will come across? Imagine this, one horror plot I can think of is, if this money is being transferred to somebody's account, but that money has not been taken from your account. See, if you transfer 1,000 and 2,000 goes to, if you're trying to transfer 1,000, but say 2,000 is debited from your account and 2,000 is credited to your account, that's not really a horror plot, but that's a functional issue. But imagine this, I am transferring 1,000. Say only 1,000 has been debited from my account, but 5,000 has been credited into that person's account. We don't know how that 5,000 reflected. It's not been taken from here. Now that is a typical horror plot for me. Now once I know about it, then I should start figuring out first, why would this come? If this scenario happens, why would this come? What would be the fundamental underlying reason for it? What could be the potential reason? Say this information is passed over a URL or over a post or a REST API call. What if somebody is able to modify this? So at your end, you are not getting impacted, but at the crediting end, where it's being transferred to a particular account, at that point of time, somebody is modifying it. So money is being generated out of nowhere by modifying a parameter. Okay. So look at what could be a horror plot. Extreme something that you never want for the system or that user story to do, and then figure out what will cause it, what could be the underlying cause, what can be more issues that may come because of this. So that is one thing to be done, one step to be done. I'll have to quickly run through it. The next thing to be done is to do story splitting. I know this is a very complicated image that's being shown concisely. So what I'll do is, I have a better image of it. Let me share my screen for that image. This is a much better image. Okay. So what do I mean by splitting and why it's important? It's important both from the testing and from the development perspective. See, sometimes what happens is your stories are too big, either to be developed or to be tested within the same sprint. So the first thing to be done for us is to see if the story is big enough to be split. So first, you see if its story follows the invest principle. So that's a principle that every story has to follow. Is it independent? Is it negotiable? Is it valuable, estimatable, small, and testable? That's the invest. If it's not following the invest principle, then immediately either way you'll have to go and modify the story or combine it with something else. Now, if it's a good story, then you come back and check if the story size is between 1/10 to 1/6 the size of your velocity. Okay, imagine your sprint velocity is 40. Now the story point for your story should be between 1/10 to 1/6 of your velocity. So it should be between somewhere between 4 to 7. If it is between 4 to 7, if the story point is between 4 to 7, then you can leave it alone. You don't need to split it. But if you feel it's much bigger than that, you need to split the story. Okay. So there are different ways in which you can split the story. You can either follow workflow wise or operations wise or simple complex splitting or business rule variation splitting. Among all the possible scenarios, I will just share a couple of scenarios with you for story splitting. Okay, let me bring it back. Okay. Let me bring it back. So there are about 10 ways in which you can split the story, both from a development perspective and from a testing perspective. We're going to pick and choose a couple of them. We can't cover all of them together. One way to split is by workflow steps. Okay. So you identify specific steps that a user is going to take to accomplish a workflow and then do it in increments. For example, there is an energy company which wants to publish its pricing. It's a private electricity firm. You're getting power from them. They're giving you the power to choose the package. So before that, they want to publish the tariff package. They have it as one story. As it says, as an energy utility pricing manager, I want to publish pricing programs to my customers so they may choose the best package suited for them. But it's too big a story for me to do it in one sprint and to test in one sprint. So what can I do? I can split it as per workflows. I say, okay, I can directly publish it to the home display. That's one story. I can send notification over the pricing plans over the web portal or the mobile app. That is one way of doing it. Another is, if they have smart home control devices, etc., I can publish the package there somewhere they can take a decision. So this is splitting as per workflow steps. Sometimes it can be split by business rule variation stories. Okay, imagine this. They have, it says, as an energy utility pricing manager, I want to sort the customer based on demographics. I want to know the different demographics of my customers so I can design better pricing packages for them. Now, how can the sort happen? The sort could, I can split the story based on the rule. Okay, one sorting will be done by area pin code. Another type of report where I can do a sort by income. Another type of report where I can do the sort by consumption or bill value. Now, if I do these splits and create separate stories, and then I can integrate all of them together into a story in a later release, and I can test in that way as well. You can split stories by major effort, minor effort. Okay. What is starting from the simplest to the most complicated one? For example, here is a user story which says, as an energy utility user, I want to be able to select my pricing plan through the app. I want to be able to choose. So there are multiple ways in which I can choose. The simplest being, okay, that I can bid on a daily basis. Every day I can bid on the pricing scheme. Or next is I can prepay my monthly plan. I choose one plan, prepaid, story over. Or I can go on demand pricing. This is where I say, okay, whatever is the current pricing, you will apply to me. I'm not prepaying. I'm not going to bid on a daily basis. I can split it by effort required. These are all just examples, okay? We can split by simple, complex. There's a story here that says, as an energy utility user, I want a fixed price, but I also want to be notified for any peak pricing. Suddenly it changes, so I can optimize the energy bill. So here, there is simple and complex. The complex is, I will respond real time. Each time there is a critical peak pricing, I will respond. The simple split of that story is, so I'll do both parts, but I'll split it. The simple part of the story is, I will respond. I have put a threshold. If the price goes beyond it, not every peak pricing, but if it goes beyond this threshold, only then I will respond. Till then, I don't need to be notified of anything. Okay, or it could be based on variations of data. Okay, I want to send a message. Okay, so it could be based on language. It could be based on PIN code, social security numbers. Then it could be split by operations, CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So it says as energy utilized user, I want to manage my account. So creation, where I sign up, editing my details, deletion, where I cancel, updation, okay, just viewing my details. So these can all be separate stories. So splitting, okay, there are, as I told you, there are about 10 different ways, and there is an in-depth way of splitting it. I'm just giving you hints here, okay, which you can implement within your project. Step 4, okay, try to implement behavior-driven development or BDD in some format or the other. See, why BDD came into play was because it wanted to bring in collaboration between developers, QA, technical, non-technical people. It kind of encourages some kind of a conversation among team members on how the application behaves. Understand, the primary reason why BDD is kind of successful today, and before that, I'd like to mention the strength of the BDD lies, of behavior-driven development, lies in the fact that it uses something called specifications by examples. See, the requirement or the specification is put across as an example, a real-life example that you understand. Why? Because human brains are not generally great at understanding abstractions when they are first exposed. And when a new idea is exposed to them, they're not great at picking up these abstractions. But they are good at deriving abstractions if you give concrete examples. Let me mention a situation to you. Imagine before an ATM and all existed, somebody was trying to explain an ATM to a developer or a tester. The product designer was trying to explain it. They would have found it very, very difficult. But because it is an abstraction of a concept. But imagine each part of that ATM was described as a concrete example. You might say, you will see a screen with buttons. It's almost like a TV. Instead of TV buttons, it will have different buttons where you can choose. So that's one abstract, concrete example given. He said money will be given like a vending machine that you have already seen. But this is a money vending machine. Instead of choosing what you want to buy, in this vending machine, you go and choose how much money you want. That's all. Okay. So humans understand examples better than abstractions, and that's why BDD comes into play. So how can we do BDD? Okay. I hope this is clear enough for you. So how do we start it? First, we start by illustrating a particular requirement. So you take up a requirement from the backlog, okay, and then you start creating business rules and illustrating it to the entire team, BA, testers, developers. Again, let me go back to the ATM example. Now, what are the rules that I need to know? There are ATM withdrawals can happen. So there are rules for minimum, maximum. Daily balance, not exceeding a daily balance. Ensuring it is taken in the correct denomination. So there are rules for that. There are rules to ensure that you cannot do multiple transactions from the same ATM. So a lot of rules might be there. Okay. So from each story, we have to define rules for that. Say, for example, there is a story as an end user, as a bank customer, I want to be able to withdraw cash from the ATM so that I can meet my financial needs. So that is the story. Okay. Now that story has multiple rules. What are the rules? You should have enough balance within your account. Whatever is the amount that you have entered, it should be lesser than your balance. Second, whatever is the amount that you entered should fall in the valid range, because there are valid numbers, minimum increment, minimum denomination numbers to be followed. There is a minimum and a maximum to be followed. That's another rule. Minimum amount to be withdrawn, maximum amount to be withdrawn as per your account. Next, there might be a daily limit or a weekly limit. So even if you're withdrawn at another ATM, the daily limit has to be checked. So these are the rules that will come under the main story. Okay. Now from there, we have to create what we call as examples. Okay. We'll see an example. I'll show you a specification by example. So once we create that, from there we formulate executable specifications. So you use a tool or a framework like any BDD tool or framework like say Cucumber, Gherkin, RSpec, etc. To create, see, these are steps you can follow or not follow. Okay, to create your executable specifications. From there you automate them and run these tests to validate and demonstrate. Okay, so what you do? You have a story. Under these stories, you will have rules. And for each of these rules, for example, let me tell a rule under the story for withdrawal. Okay, which is I should be, when I withdraw, I should be checking if it is a valid amount and lesser than the account balance that I have. And once withdrawal is done, that money should be debited from my account. So what is the example that I'll write? I will say user 1 has 1,000 rupees within his account. User 1 tries to withdraw. Okay, so the typical format for BDD is given when then. So let me put in the given when then format. Given user 1 has 1,000 rupees in his account. When user 1 wants to withdraw 500, and when user 1 has a daily withdrawal limit of 5,000, and when the ATM has enough money within 500 rupee denominations available, then 500 is dispensed as cash to user 1. Then what else happens? 500 is debited from user 1's account. So only the remaining balance is 500. From 1,000, I withdraw 500. 500 is given. 500 is debited. That is an example, a concrete example. Okay. From there, we can create BDD specification. Okay. So you have scenario, preconditions, action, the result, something similar that I mentioned here. So we come to what's called the agile test cycle. Okay. Of all the things that we have gained, put together. Okay. Initially, we have to start with 1 minute. Just a minute. We try to get the drawing tool up. Okay, I'm not able to. Okay. So initially, we have to start from the thinking phase. From our specification, from the requirement. This is the known part of it, what we know. So ask questions, do critical thinking, do a horror plot. From that, we test what we know. Not only automated, manual as well, unit test, integration test, security test. But we should not forget what the unknown unknowns and known unknowns. That is where we should be using our exploratory test, usability test, bug hunting, resilience test. Typically, 50% of your test cycle should be spent on these unknown unknowns using your exploratory test. So your facts and questions, you can test using your automated checks, unit testing, manual testing, API testing, etc. It is the last two parts, your intuition exploration, which will require a lot of exploratory testing, usability testing, mock testing, pair testing, etc. And if we miss them out, you're missing a large part of tests that we should be doing within our agile cycles. Okay. So how do we tackle our unknown unknowns? Exploratory testing is just found to be a pretty interesting way of doing it, or known to be the most efficient way of doing it. Let me put it that way. Okay. So when I say exploratory testing, I don't mean just jumping into a system and clicking around and trying to find a few errors. No. It should be a structured approach. And there is a way of structuring exploratory testing. It's called SBTM, session-based test management. So here, every test should have a goal. Okay. It should be well defined. What do you want to do with it? It should have a source. Where do you start? It will require resources and it will require a charter. Like what we do with user stories, we'll also create charters for doing it. I'll give an example charter. Explore what is the goal with these resources to discover what, to discover this info. We are discovering. We are not confirming the information already available. No, we are testing to discovering info. I just put a dummy example. Explore input printing material with the UI and printer hardware to discover error handling issues. Okay. So this was basically to give you an idea. Okay, sorry. This was basically to give you an idea of what else or a different approach, and just to put it across to you very clearly, saying that when you're testing only for the acceptance criteria, only confirming the user stories, we're missing a large part out, which is expected within agile testing. We're missing a large part out. And how do we structure it? And a couple of steps for it. Prasanna, you can take over from here.
Yeah, I think we have time for questions as well. So if anyone has any questions.
We are actually exceeded time by half an hour, but we'll still take about 10 minutes worth of time.
Sure, sure.
The industry standards within about a 30% increase in your practice, 6 plus the variables depending on the rules that you're having.
I'm not able to hear.
Yeah, I don't think we have any questions. So, sir, I think we'll be able to end for the session if you are done with it.
Sure, I'm done. I'm done. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, JP sir. I hope everyone found this session really useful. Thanks a lot to JP sir as well for explaining this brilliantly. So before we end, I would just like to let everyone know that we have the Certified Agile Testing Practitioner course public batch on in the month of August. The dates are 7th, 8th, 9th of August. So if you have any queries or would like to further know about the course or like to register, you can get in touch with us. As you can see the numbers and the email IDs on the screen there. You can note them down. And if you have any other queries, you can anyways reach out to JP or to us at Verity Software anytime. Thanks a lot, everyone. So if I hope you all enjoyed the session, and again, thanks a lot to JP sir also for delivering this great session. Hope you all have a great day ahead and stay safe.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
This conference will now be recorded.